peripherals. In this nugget, we talk about a few peripherals, and we'll start off with video standards, such as SVGA, so that you know what that is, XGA, and some of the other standards, so you have some sense of context, although you don't have to memorize every standard, because there's quite a few there. And then we also need to understand a little bit about the monitors that connect to the video adapters that support these standards. We'll be primarily talking about CRT and LCD monitors, but don't forget there's also touchscreen monitors and projectors that you could deal with as well. Another thing important to know about projectors, by the way, is how to make them work with a laptop once you connect them. Then we'll also talk about some additional peripherals that don't really have a dedicated topic of their own elsewhere, so I want to make sure that we collect those additional items and so that you understand what those are as well. Let me tell you about the story of a monitor that I had in my home until just recently, and I'll draw a monitor on here. Not a very good looking monitor. Kind of looks like the Picasso of monitors. Hopefully your monitors look better than that. Anyway, it was a 19-inch monitor that I bought with the Dell years ago, and at the time it came out, it was a really hot item. Everybody loved it. People that came into my office said, wow, what a nice, huge monitor. But this is also a CRT monitor, which we'll discuss a little bit later as we go here. And as such, it took up a lot of space, and it weighed 30 pounds. I don't really know that for sure, but when I'd pick it up, man, it sure was awfully heavy. Probably was about 30 pounds. Well, a while back, I decided to spring for two new ViewSonics that I now have on my desktop, and they're liquid crystal display monitors, quite a lot nicer, neater, better image and everything. So what did I do with this old 19-inch one? Well, I did what every loving parent would do. I gave it to my deserving children. Yes, indeed, they inherited my old junk. So they've had that up there for a while, and then after a while, my wife, in her business, she came across a 15-inch liquid crystal display that she didn't need anymore. So she gave my kids that 15-inch liquid crystal display monitor. Then I had this old 19-inch monitor, which is now several years old, and I didn't want to throw it in a landfill. We didn't need it around here anymore. I didn't want to throw it in a landfill for environmental reasons, so what did I do? What every good neighbor does. I put it out on the sidewalk with a free sign on it. You know, that thing was so popular when they first came out, and that monitor sat out on my sidewalk for 4 days before someone finally came along and decided it was worth the effort to pick up that 30-pound monitor. I hope it still works, actually, because one morning the sprinklers came on, and I think it got wet. But anyway, at least I got it off of my sidewalk now. But anyway, much like that old monitor that I had, we also have emerging video standards, which make some of the older technologies defunct. And I only provide this information just for context. You don't need to memorize any of this. But one of the reasons why I provide the defunct technologies is because you might still see somebody bring in a really old computer that either has a monochrome monitor like my first one, which was green letters on a dark screen, or later on I upgraded to amber letters on a dark screen, and I was the envy of all the geeks in the computer club. And then we also have other technologies like extended graphics adapter, color graphics adapter, or video graphics array. All of these things are pretty well defunct, although we still use the term VGA, such as in VGA cables, and every other technology is usually some form of a video graphics array or a VGA kind of technology. But the original VGA we don't really use anymore. Even SVGA, which is Super Video Graphics Array, we don't really use anymore either, although you will probably more likely see this around, especially again in businesses that have been around for a while, never found a reason to upgrade. Hey, it's been working for 10 years, why should we change now? That sort of thing. So you might see those there. And then you might also see extended graphics array. This is an IBM invention that originally came out with something called an MCA bus, an expansion board, which is micro-channel architecture. Now that's, again, a defunct item, but I only put it in there because notice that XGA kind of carries on through some of the other technologies that we have. It was the predecessor to these other things, and it's pretty much what you're going to be seeing today in some form or another with new monitors and new computers and new video cards. And these standards that I'm showing you here, by the way, are mostly specific to video cards, although you certainly do have to have a monitor that can support the kind of resolution that you're trying to show. So if you're buying something new, certainly you need to check documentation. Also, there are many other standards besides the ones that I list here, but the reason why I do these is because the front letter on each one of these does have some meaning. W, of course, meaning wide or wide screen. This is where you're going to see something like a 16:9 or a 16:10 aspect ratio, as opposed to, that's the same kind of thing you see on your televisions. Widescreen TVs as opposed to the more rectangular 4:3 aspect ratio. These other dimensions, like this one up here for XGA, that's a 4:3 aspect ratio, and this is a 16:9 ratio down here. The Q here simply means quadruple. Now that doesn't mean that you multiply times 4 like a 1024 and then multiply by 4 is 768. If you multiply this by 2 and this by 2, that's a total of multiplying by 4. So if I multiply this by 2, that would be a 2048. Multiply this by 2, that would be 1536. That's where we get our quadruple XGA resolution there, giving us 2048 by 1536. And we have 4 billion colors available for all the rest of these as well. And then we also have this UXGA, and this one means Ultra Extended Graphics Array. It's also a quadrupling. What we'll do with that is we'll take SVGA times 2 here, which would be 1600, times 2 here, which would be 1200, gives us 1600 by 1200. And then there's another one I haven't listed here, which would be HXGA, which is not something that actually literally even exists, at least not quite yet. What that's going to do is it's going to multiply by 4 in each direction. So that's going to be a total of a factor by 16, and at the time, as far as I know, at this recording, there's not really any monitors that are capable of displaying the resolution that that would be able to put out. So far, at least, it's kind of more of a theoretical resolution. But now let's go ahead and take a look at some of the monitors that will support the kinds of resolutions we saw from video adapters on the previous page. First of all, you know what? I kind of got these backwards. Let me just start with this one. I'd rather start with the older technology first. Let's start with CRT, or cathode ray tube. And this is going to be much like your television set. If you're like me, I remember when I was young, we used to sit in front of the television back in the 60s. Yes, the 60s, and watch Star Trek when it first came out. And one of the things that we had a problem with was that, first of all, it was a black and white television, even though Star Trek was in color. My dad was too cheap to upgrade to that newfound technology, that newfangled stuff. So we had a black and white TV watching the old versions of Captain Kirk and Star Trek on there, and we had a vertical hold problem on our old television. I know that for some unknown reason, you'd be watching the TV show, and the screen would just go vertically. It would just flip up and up and up, and it would just like scrolling off and on and off and on the screen. And I think you've probably seen that before yourselves on older televisions as well as on older monitors. Well, remember, there's going to be a vertical hold button down at the bottom or somewhere on the control panel for that monitor. If you just look at the buttons, there's probably a menu system somewhere or something that allows you to adjust those things. And what that can do is, so if this is my monitor here, this is a picture, if there's a person in there, if the vertical hold is out of whack and a person's head should be up at the top of the picture, but instead it cuts off the top of their head, and so you can see them here, and then, you know, there's their arms and so forth. Well, their head is supposed to be in the picture, but it's kind of scrolled off a screen there. They need to adjust the vertical hold to move the picture of the person down, and you can also do that with the other aspects of this as well. You can bring the picture in more one direction or the other, and you can also adjust things such called pillowing, which is where you get not quite rectangular shape out of it, where it just seems to curve in and out on the sides. That's especially going to be the case with older and less advanced monitors. But those are some of the kind of controls that you can work with on a CRT monitor. Also, with these CRTs, let me draw a profile of it to explain this. Remember, there's going to be kind of deep there, and then this is the front of it where there'll be glass, and it's often curved, but sometimes they're flat. And then we'll have here back at the gun an electron gun, which is going to send out electron beams towards this glass on the front. The back of the glass is coated with a phosphorus material. And when the electrons strike this phosphorus material, they glow. The thing is, the phosphorus material can't stay on constantly. Once it gets hit, it doesn't just stay on for 5 minutes or something like that. It has to constantly be refreshed. So what happens is, it draws from the top to bottom, and if you're looking at the screen, it goes from left to right, and then from top to bottom on here to give us that image. In reality, the picture is constantly appearing and reappearing and disappearing and reappearing and disappearing and reappearing. But to the human eye, it looks constant. You might have heard of 60 megahertz for refresh, megahertz, 75 megahertz, that kind of thing. That talks about how frequently it refreshes this display. Some people, it doesn't make any difference to me, but some people that I know, if they have the resolution, or rather the refresh rate set at 60 megahertz, they can actually see it flickering, and it kind of gives them a headache, and it's very annoying to them. If you were to take a photograph of a CRT monitor, you would see some effect of that, because it would show a banding from the top to the bottom where it was darker or lighter, and you can kind of visually see where it's drawing at that point in time. Also, most current monitors will not have a trouble with this refresh rate, but it used to be that if you have an older monitor and a newer video card that was able to support maybe a refresh rate of, oh, let's say 85 megahertz, but the old monitor could only support, say, 75 megahertz, then what would happen is the video card would send out refresh rates that the monitor could not handle, and it could potentially damage or ruin this monitor. Most newer CRT monitors will simply not allow that higher refresh rate. If you try to send out a higher refresh rate, it'll just scan up its highest available refresh rate instead. The other thing about these CRTs, of course, as you heard me talk about at the beginning of this video, is they're extremely unwieldy. This can be pretty deep in here. I think mine was about 18 inches. My 19-inch monitor was about 18 inches deep, so it took up a lot of desk space. It was also very, very heavy. It was basically just no fun whatsoever to deal with. All right, let's move on to something that is more fun, and that would be the liquid crystal display. You see, what happens with these liquid crystals is they're activated by electrical fields. And what they'll do is when the liquid crystals receive an electrical field, it's either going to open that liquid crystals in such a way that it's going to allow light through, kind of acts like a shutter, if you will, and allows light through, and then it will pass on through to a filter. It's going to be either a red, green, or blue filter. And you know how things appear on the monitor, any colors that you see are usually some combination of red, green, and blue. So using those tiny pixels, it's going to go ahead and create some color and some definition. The advantage here with liquid crystals, is, of course, is going to be that they're not this unwieldy thing. They're usually much, much lighter. My 19-inch monitors now probably weigh, I don't know, 8 pounds, maybe 10 pounds. Much easier to work with. They're flat screen. They don't take up anywhere near as much space on the desktop, which can be very handy for something like a smaller apartment or a smaller cubicle. And also, of course, they're used on all laptops these days as well, because you can't very well put a CRT tube on a laptop. Actually, you can. We used to call those portable computers. I used to have one of the first ones that came out. Cost thousands of dollars, and it was a small CRT tube, and you had to fold the whole thing up differently. It was about the size of a crate, I guess. And it also weighed like 30, 40 pounds. It was extremely unwieldy, but fortunately we have LCDs now. Now what we'll also get with these, and I'm out of order here, but it's sharp images that I started to mention a little while ago. We can get pretty good images out of CRTs, much sharper images out of LCDs, and because we don't have this refresh rate that goes on with CRTs, where some people are capable of seeing even faster refresh rates, it's less fatiguing to the eyes, and it hopefully helps us to be a little bit more productive. Now let me go back up here to this. This is called the CCFL and an inverter. What in the world is all that about? Now, contrary to popular opinion, LCDs don't actually emit their own light. It's just a rearrangement of crystals. We have to have a light to go through the openings in the LCD screen where it's opening up to allow light to pass on through to the filter. What we do to light that with, then, is we use a fluorescent tube called a cold cathode fluorescent lamp, or a CCFL. It has to receive power, and it receives that power from an inverter, because coming into computers, we have direct current. So your household electricity is usually alternating current, or AC, and then it has to be converted to direct current when it goes into your computer, because it's a cleaner, better kind of a power for the kind of electrical components that we work with. However, because of the high electrical requirements of these CCFLs, it's got to be converted back again, hence the inverter name instead of converter. Has to be converted back to AC power in order to be able to work with these fluorescent lamps. But the issue with the inverter is that it's going to be a high voltage, high frequency energy capability that it has to be able to handle. As such, it can be dangerous to work with, so you don't want to mess with the inverter or touch it directly unless you have special factory training for whatever monitor it is that you're working on. Now, for both LCDs and CRTs, you're also going to have some cleaning and maintenance that you have to keep in mind. In terms of cleaning, for CRTs especially, you can normally use glass cleaner. Don't spray directly on the monitor, however. Spray on the paper towel or whatever your cleaning material is. Spray on that and then wipe the monitor off, because if you spray directly onto the monitor, a droplet could form, it could leak down, and it could roll down the surface of the screen and underneath the bezel, and there's sensitive electrical components underneath there that, of course, will not mix very well with water. Don't ask me how I know about that, by the way. But anyway, just use whatever the recommended cleaning method is from the manufacturer. Again, glass cleaner usually works pretty well with these, but with LCDs, you might be able to use a non-ammonia-based glass cleaner as well, but check with the manufacturer. You can also get those cleaning towelettes that are in these foil-sealed packets that will also be safe on either kind of surface. And then in terms of maintenance and maintaining these things, one thing you want to make sure you tell your users to make sure that they don't have to get fixed or repaired is that they don't stack anything on tops of the monitors. Now with LCDs, that's a little bit more difficult because they're pretty thin anyway. They're only an inch or two anyway. But with CRTs, it's much more tempting to take a file folder, a manila folder, a stack of papers or something, and put them on top of the monitor here. But you see there are vents at the top of the monitor which dissipate heat that comes out of the tops of these. And if you block that up so that no heat can escape, then it builds up inside, and of course that can cause some electrical problems or even a hazard inside of this monitor. Now, in terms of the maintenance, we don't normally work on the insides of monitors very often. Normally, that's something, especially if it's still under warranty, that we just send into the manufacturer for instead, because they'll have specialized training for their specific product to know where the dangerous electrical components are that could still store quite a lot of electricity. Now, this is even more true with CRTs because they do store quite a lot of power. If you ever did work with one of those, however, and again, I recommend that you do not do that, what you would probably do is you'd have to attach a resistor to the flyback transformer's charging capacitor. And what this does is it's going to release the electrical charge that's built up during use. So basically what we want to do is to discharge the electricity that is inside of there. You can do this using a high voltage probe. On one end of the probe is a large needle, on the other end is an alligator clip. The needle side will also indicate the amount of voltage that's inside of the device. What you do is you attach the alligator clip to a ground, and then you slip the probe needle under something called the high voltage cup on the monitor. Now you'll have to get the schematics for that particular monitor from the manufacturer to be able to know where that is, unless you are familiar with it and you can recognize it. Anyway, you slip the gauge spike underneath that high voltage cup on the monitor, and you'll see it spike to around 15,000 volts, and then it'll slowly reduce to zero. Once it reduces to zero, it should be relatively safe to work inside, although there may be other electrical components that also store electricity. This is likely to be the most hazardous one that you can discharge. The other thing to be careful of there with CRTs is that they're vacuum sealed, so be extremely careful when you're handling it. If you drop a screwdriver on it or something like that, or drop something on it, then if it explodes, it'll implode, but what happens there is that it's going to implode, and then as the air gets sucked in, it's then going to have a small explosion as well, and glass could come flying out of it. So just be careful because of the violent inrush of glass. There's going to be a ricocheting effect in there. Something could also fly out and hit you in the eye or something, so you definitely do not want to mess around with those CRTs if at all possible. And then before I conclude our discussion about monitors, let me talk about a couple of other things. One of those will be projectors. A lot of times, if you're a traveling salesperson or you need to give presentations of some kind like I do and very often, and like my wife does, who's also a public speaker, what we do is we take our laptops, we have PowerPoint on them, we want to give a presentation, but we plug in an external monitor or more likely a projector, which will project, of course, onto a screen. Normally that's going to take place through an S-video connection or through a VGA connector. However, one thing that you'll run into at times is that the laptop will not know that there is an external projector, so you may have to go ahead and tell it that it's there. One thing that might happen, depends on the laptop, and they're all different, is that if you just have the computer completely turned off and you start it up with the projector already attached and turned on, then the laptop may detect it automatically and it identifies the projector as a second monitor is what it does. If it does not do that, however, what you can usually do is to go to your laptop, and here's just an old beat up laptop that I don't even use anymore. My daughter got a hold of it and put a Hello Kitty sticker on it. But anyway, I used to give presentations on this old laptop, and what I would do is there's a VGA port in the back over here, and there's an FN button on the keyboard. What you do is you hold that down, and then you'd press F4. Now, it's different for all manufacturers. It might be one of these other function buttons, but it's usually the FN button and one of these function buttons, F4 or F5 are very common, and then you just cycle through, hold down FN, tap F4 once, and see if it goes out to the monitor or external monitor or projector. Normally on this laptop, as I recall, it would blank out this screen, so I couldn't see anything here, but the projector would work. Then if I'd tap it again, both this monitor and the projector were both on, and I could see on both simultaneously. And you may need to go into your display properties as well by right-clicking on the desktop and choosing properties, or accessing it through the control panel. And then on the settings tab here, you can see that on one of my computers here, I've got two different monitors that are identified. And what you'll see with the projector is it will show up kind of is a grayed out or kind of a dimmed out view over here. If this was the projector, you would simply select that item and then click extend my Windows desktop onto this monitor, and then PowerPoint can also be configured in such a way, depending on which version you're working with, to give you something called a presenter view, where on your screen it shows you your notes. On your laptop screen, for example, it shows your notes and it shows the next slide that's coming up, whereas on the viewer's screen, which would be the projector, it only shows the actual slideshow itself. And then finally, we have touchscreens. These aren't really given a whole lot of attention with the A+ exam objectives, but they just mentioned in brief. With these, you have XY coordinates with a sensor on the screen so that it can identify usually where your finger touches that screen. It may also use a stylus of some kind, similar to what you might have seen in certain retail environments where you enter in a PIN number when you use your debit card, or where you use a stylus to write your signature on that touchscreen as well. The kind of touchscreens that we're talking about more likely, however, for A+ types of objectives would be a real monitor where instead of using a keyboard and mouse, you just use your finger instead to be able to touch on certain things on the screen. Because of the fact that your fingertip does not have fine-grained control or a very exacting pinpoint location, usually you're going to use that with some kind of a software that has larger buttons or something like that, similar to what you would enter in at the ATM, where you can enter in on your keypad on the touchscreen there. Usually it's not going to be a really fine-grained thing where you click on a specific pixel or something like that that you can do with a mouse. All right, then, as we conclude our discussion of peripherals here, let's also talk about barcode readers. Now, I'm sure you've seen these in many places, grocery stores, retail outlets, all different kinds of places, where you can even go in self-checkout lanes now, and instead of having a cash register operator scan your items for you, of course, you scan them yourself. You put the cash in yourself into a little slot. You get your own change. You put your own receipt in the bag. Heck, they ought to pay you for doing all of that work since they're not paying anybody else to do it anymore. But we see now that just about anybody can use a barcode reader. You either pull a trigger on a little handheld device or you just run it across the barcode reader that's directly into the counter. And these barcodes are globally unique so that you can't take a 52-inch Sony HD TV television, scan that item, and then get charged for a 1-gallon bucket of Neapolitan ice cream instead, although wouldn't that be nice? $4,000 or $5,000 television for only $2.99. And of course I mentioned the HD TV because, well, it is my birthday soon, so if you're trying to think of ideas, well, I'll just leave it at that. Okay, anyway, for our barcode readers, as an A+ technician, you need to know that it can connect a number of different ways, none of which will probably surprise you. One would be through a serial port, on an RS-232 connection, for example. We don't really need a lot of high throughput with this because when you read the barcode scanner reads the data, it's only reading a number that's about 12 digits long. And that's not really a high amount of throughput that needs to go through. So serial's fine. Any version of USB 1.1 or 2.0 is fine. Again, we don't need a whole lot of throughput, so that's pretty common. USB is. And then I also see this connected through a keyboard or a PS2, actually PS2, kind of messy there, but PS2 connection. And what happens here is, here's the back of a computer or whatever the retail computing device is. And normally out of the back of this, you might see a keyboard, right? Well, here's some keys on the keyboard, for example. Well, you might also have one of these that kind of goes off into a split. And on the other end of this, it'll also have one of these guns, one of these retail scanning guns that scans barcodes. And here's a little trigger on it, for example. When it reads this now, it goes back through the PS2 port, and as far as the computer and the software and everything in the computer goes, it reads that as if someone had just punched in the numbers on the keyboard. So it really doesn't distinguish that way. So that's just another way that can be connected. It can also be connected through proprietary means that are specific to a vendor of these cash registers or whatever the devices are, and you might need to depend on their own service personnel to service those physical connections if there's a problem. But more than likely, you're going to find one of these three, and particularly the top two are most common. Nowadays, we are also seeing wireless communications or also might be using infrared, radio frequencies, Bluetooth, or Wi-Fi. And we'll talk more about Wi-Fi when we talk about wireless networking later on in this series. Now, the A+ exam objectives also call for knowledge just of multimedia, and they kind of just leave it there. So I've already talked a lot about multimedia in other places like MIDI devices, sound cards, and the like, microphones that you can plug into the back of a sound card, for example. But one thing I haven't talked about a whole lot so far would be digital cameras. Now, with multimedia devices like digital cameras, most of the time when you get one, whether it's a point-and-shoot one or a digital SLR or something like that, you can go ahead and use the manufacturer's cable. It's very often a proprietary cable that only works with their camera. You plug it into a port on their camera, and then you plug the other end into a USB connection. And there's usually some translation of a USB device that you would then plug into your USB port on your computer. Now, I just plugged in another alternative to that as well. I don't usually plug in my camera directly into my computer, although certainly you can if you want to. I usually just take the memory card out of the camera and then plug it into a card reader, which I just plugged the card reader into my computer just a moment ago while I was talking here. And so plug and play has properly detected it now. And then I'm going to be able to plug in a compact flash card into that memory card reader. Now this will accept all different kinds of all kinds of flash memory. I just happen to use compact flash for my own systems. So I've gone ahead and for my own camera. So I've gone ahead and plugged in now a compact flash card, and we'll see what we can get off of it. Now, one of the things you'll need to know about if you do use a card reader is that, of course, they can read multiple different kinds of format, whether it's an SD card, a Memory Stick Pro card, a Memory Stick Pro Duo, compact flash, mini SD, all these different kinds of formats. I've already plugged in one of those into my system, but if you can't see everything there, let me first of all just go to my computer and show it to you. You'll see that it does show discs. These removable discs that we see right here are actually part of that card reader. Right now there's nothing in any of those. So if I click on one of them and try to open it up, it says there's nothing in there. So that's how they're being read, is as removable discs. Now I do have a compact flash card, which is what I shoot with, inside one of those slots, but if I click on all this stuff, I'm still not seeing it. Well, what could that be about? What you need to do here then is to go to my computer, and I'll go right here to my computer, right click and choose Manage, because I need to go into disk management here to see if there's a conflicting drive letter issue. And in fact, there's a drive H right here, but in reality, if I open up Windows Explorer, I see that drive H is already mapped to a network drive. So since there's a conflict, it'll only allow me to read one of them. There's no way to read two drive H's. So I'll change this by right-clicking and choose Change Drive Letters and Paths, and then choose Change. And now, and of course, we're ahead of ourselves a little bit because we're talking about Windows now. But and as much as we need to be able to see the data on this card, we'll just choose some other drive letter through our current means. I'll choose drive Q for lack of a better idea. And then it'll get a warning saying that if I've run programs off of this in the past, now those programs might be looking for drive H and no longer be able to run. That's not the case in this case because I've never used it. So I'll go ahead and say yes to allow that to happen. And then it shows that I've got some pictures here. What do I want to do? I'll just choose Open Folder to view the files. And in my items right here, oops, clicked on too many things. Here's a picture I shot just yesterday, in fact, of butterflies on, I guess that's a tulip or some kind of flower. I'm not very good with flowers, but of a butterfly at the Desert Botanical Gardens here in Phoenix, and they have kind of a butterfly exhibit that goes on. So I got my camera out and went and shot a couple of pictures. But as it relates to using these memory cards for an A+ technician's advice or perspective, you just need to make sure that you can read those cards. If I can't read that card, then what could be wrong? Number one, the conflicting drive letter that we just saw. If it's been able to read them in the past, but it can't read them now, always check the physical. And this really applies across almost every troubleshooting scenario relating to hardware with A+ exam objectives and in the objectives and in practice. Always check the physical if something does not appear to be working properly. So anyway, this file does now appear. If I want to move it somewhere else or whatever, I can treat it just like any other file on any other drive and move or copy that file as necessary. Now, of course, what I just showed you there was the ability to take data from a still camera, so you're taking a file and you're putting it onto your computer, and then you can do whatever you want to with it. But you might also want to work with video instead. So, for example, maybe you want to do a little web conferencing of some kind using a webcam, a video conferencing. And you can plug in a device to a USB port. I did that just a few moments ago, and Plug and Play properly detected a device for me. But now I need to use some kind of software for it. You can buy your own, or you can, if it's just for social purposes, maybe you can use Windows Messenger, Yahoo Messenger. Most of those messaging programs right now support webcams, so you can use those in conjunction with that. And I can also create my own home movies, for example, like this. My kids love to do this. They get the webcam and they like to create their own crazy, wacky movies and stuff, and then they store them all on my hard drive and chew up all my hard drive space. But anyway, how would we be able to work with these webcams or USB cameras? Well, here I'm in Windows Movie Maker, and I'm going to click Capture from Video Device. Now, if my voice goes a little bit quiet for a moment, that's going to have to be that way just temporarily while I adjust the audio, because after I click on this, I'll have to adjust audio. Just watch this. I click on that, and then my microphone level is low, but as I move this up, you should be able to hear me a little bit better now, because it's using the same headset that I'm recording with. And then this is the USB camera, the Intel USB camera that we're working with. I'll click on Next. I'll have to save this as a file somewhere, and then I need to choose the quality for this. Let me just go, I don't know, 340 kilobits per second. Of course, the higher the quality, the larger the data file that's going to be saved with this. Then I'll just go ahead and click on Next, and let's see if this video. Oh, sure enough, there it is. So there's your friendly instructor, James Conrad. Let's see if I can focus this thing a little bit better. Maybe that's a little better right there. All right, so now you finally have a talking head to go along with all this audio that you've been listening to. You're probably thinking, geez, couldn't we have gotten a better looking instructor than this guy? Well, I'm afraid you're stuck with me, so we'll just have to deal with it. But anyway, this is the kind of thing you can use to be able to work with video conferencing and the like. Now I'm just going to click on Finish here so that you don't have to listen to me, or rather watch me talk anymore, because you'll probably like it better when my face doesn't appear on camera, and there it goes. And then it'll go ahead and prompt me for saving this, or to drop it into a storyboard here, and we'll be able to work with it later on as necessary. Now, as we return to peripherals, let's talk about some security devices here, and one of those would be a smart card to help tighten down the security regarding the logons. Not too long ago, there was a hacker that was out on the street in New York in front of a major office building, and he had a little cart there with a bunch of candy bars in it, and he said, if you give me your network password, I will give you a candy bar. Now, of course, most people were smarter than that and quickly went on by, but a few people actually fell for it. They gave him their network password credentials, and he gave them a candy bar, and so he was able to get their credentials from him. Well, the smart card helps to avoid issues with easy passwords, guest passwords, all that kind of thing, because instead of using a Control-Alt-Delete like we normally log on to Windows and entering in your username and password, instead you just take a smart card and you just plug it into a smart card reader on the computer. These smart card readers are typically attached through a USB port. And then once you put the smart card in there, what it's going to do is it's going to ask you for a PIN number, just like you have for your ATM card and other things like that. It can be a short number, doesn't have to be very complex or very difficult in any way, really, because the strength of the smart cards is not through convoluted passwords, it's through possession. In most workplaces that use a smart card, people have some kind of a lanyard around their neck, and the smart card has perhaps a picture ID of the employee on it, what department they work in, the name of the company, and then it also has a small contact chip on it as well that makes up the smart card, basically, and the intelligence of the smart card. And then when they want to log on, they simply plug that into the smart card reader and enter in their PIN. And I'm trying to remember, I think I loaded a picture of here's one. A smart card, here's just an example of one. It's pretty magnified here in the view that we see, but these are literally the same size as most credit cards, so they can fit in your wallet or whatever. Here's the contacts that appear, and when this slides into the smart card reader, these contacts, these are gold, metallic contacts, they will be read by the reader, and what's stored on here normally is going to be a certificate of some kind that identifies the specific user. Now, we're not going to go into a lot of detail about certificates here, but they're extremely high security. And smart cards like this are going to provide two-factor authentication. The two factors are this. Normally, you have one-factor authentication, your username and password, your logon credentials, in other words. We'll count that as one thing. Two-factor authentication means something I know, my PIN in this case, and something I possess, which is the smart card. So even if I lose the smart card and someone else picks it up, they still have to know my PIN in order to be able to log on as me. Now, other kinds of devices you might need for security purposes would be a fob, for example. Let me give you an example of a fob. This would be one of those kinds of things. These are hardware authenticators. What happens with this is, I don't know if you can see the picture, and I couldn't find any bigger ones, but these items are freestanding items, or keychain types of device, or credit card-sized devices. And every 60 seconds, I don't know if you can see there's an LCD screen on the front of that, that number changes. What you do is you take a PIN number that you've already registered, and you combine it with whatever the randomly generated number is here that, again, changes every 60 seconds. And that becomes your passcode. And of course, it's going to be unique every 60 seconds, so it's going to be extremely difficult, if not really just impossible, for somebody to be able to crack, because hackers need time to crack something. Well, they can't do this if this is changing every 60 seconds. And I've seen these things in a lot of highly secure organizations or places where they are defense contractors, government organizations, things like that, where logon security is at a premium. And then another type of device you might see there besides the fob would be a USB-based device. This has a very similar function to the fobs that I just showed you here. And by the way, I'm going to rsa.com to show you these things because Secure ID, and you can see it in the URL up here, Secure ID is one of the most common makers of these devices. But with this one, we also would have a similar factor to what we have with our smart cards, where we have a certificate stored on them. Very often, these will also have a certificate, and you plug it into a USB port on your computer, and then once you enter in your PIN number, it combines two factors. One, the certificate that you possess on this physical device with your PIN number. That helps to confirm that that is indeed you, and you get to log on successfully thereafter. And then finally, another kind of authentication that could take place is biometrics. Now, this sounds like, Tom Cruise Mission Impossible kind of a thing now. But really, this is something that is not only on the horizon, but has already arrived in many places. It is possible to have retinal scanners, fingerprint scanners. I've used fingerprint scanners myself, for example. And they used to be pretty high-tech and expensive, and you had to get specialized use for these things. But nowadays, they're pretty common. In fact, I just bought my wife a new laptop. Guess what? Has a fingerprint scanner built right into it, which is a kind of a handy thing because she can't seem to remember passwords. So what she does instead is she just takes her finger and just swipes it across the fingerprint scanner, and it's registered with her logon credentials. So as soon as it reads the proper fingerprint, then it will go ahead and log her on. But anything that identifies any kind of a body part or a physical or behavioral feature of any kind of an organism is called a biometric device. There's also a couple of other kinds that could be used. One of those would be voice recognition, and the other one would be facial recognition software as well. But for the A+ objectives in terms of biometrics, all you have to know is what kinds of things they are and what their purpose is. And that is that we can use these biometric devices to identify some kind of uniqueness about a person's physical or behavior features and then be able to log or authenticate that user. In this nugget, we continued our discussion of peripherals, and we started off by talking about some of the video standards that are out there. Some of them are defunct, CGA, EGA, and that. But we also talked about some more current standards, such as various versions of the XGA standard. And then we also discussed the monitors that connect to the video adapters that support those standards. Primarily, we talked about CRTs, LCDs, projectors, touchscreen monitors, and we also talked about some additional peripherals that didn't really have a category all of their own. One of the things we talked about was still cameras and how to get the data off of the memory cards there, and we also talked about webcams or video cameras, and you saw me talking in a live video, or at least live to me, while I was making this recording. Hopefully you didn't shut off the video right then or skip ahead a few minutes, but you did see me talking there, and hopefully you'll agree, bald is beautiful. Then we also talked about some security matters in terms of using additional tokens or methods to be able to secure a user's logon. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.